if I told you a monster beat a pregnant woman so viciously she went into labor?
And then murdered her newborn seconds after it took its first breath.
Yeah. And what if I told you that same monster used a 3-year-old's birthday present, a baseball bat his father gave him, to beat that child to death while his mother watched helplessly?
November 18th, 1987. Edina, Illinois. Keith Dardeen kissed his pregnant wife Elaine goodbye, hugged his 3-year-old son Peter, and left for work. He never came home. What happened in the next 24 hours is so unspeakably evil that veteran homicide detectives, these are seasoned guys, they broke down at the crime scene.
I can't even begin to imagine what they saw.
Inside their mobile home, police found Elaine, Peter, and a newborn baby girl tucked in bed together. Elaine had been beaten so savagely her body went into premature labor. She delivered her daughter while bound and gagged with duct tape.
Wait, while she was bound and gagged?
Yes. That innocent baby lived maybe 5 minutes before being bludgeoned to death. Peter was beaten with his own birthday gift, baseball bat. And it doesn't end there. A mile away, hunters found Keith's body. Shot 3 times, genitals severed. His blood-soaked car was parked outside the Benton police station, like a taunt.
A taunt.
No forced entry, no robbery, no sexual assault. Just a family obliterated in one night of calculated terror.
So what happened with the investigation?
30 detectives, over 100 interviews. And then, years later, serial killer Tommy Lynn Sells confessed from death row. He knew details.
Okay, so they had him.
But his story kept changing. Key facts didn't match, and Texas refused to let him help Illinois investigate.
So he just this.
April 3, 2014. Tommy Lynn Sells was executed, never charged. 37 years later, this case remains unsolved. 4 innocent lives destroyed, a newborn who never had a chance, and their killer may still be walking free. Welcome to Whispers of Crime. Subscribe to Whispers of Crime on YouTube, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and other podcast platforms.
To even start to understand this level of just absolute devastation, we have to look at who this family was. The normalcy of their life makes what happened so much worse. Who were Keith and Elaine Dardeen?
Well, they were really the picture of a stable, small-town American family in the 80s.
Yeah.
Keith was 29, Elaine was 30. They both actually preferred to go by their middle names.
Right.
They lived in this modest mobile home just outside of Egona, Illinois. It was right off Route 37.
So a pretty rural setting.
It was, and it wasn't. Route 37 is a busy state road, but their home was set back. It felt isolated, especially at night.
And what about them, their day-to-day?
Keith was from a town called Mount Carmel, and everyone described him as just incredibly reliable. You could set your watch by him. He had a good, steady job as a treatment plant operator at the Red Lake Water Conservancy District.
Okay.
And Elaine, she was from Albion, and she worked at an office supply store over in Mount Vernon.
But their life was really centered around something else, wasn't it? Their faith?
Very much so. They were deeply involved in their local Baptist church. It was a small congregation, the kind where everybody knows everybody. Keith, apparently, had a beautiful voice. He sang lead vocals in the choir.
And Elaine played piano?
Exactly. Elaine played the piano. Friends, neighbors, everyone you talk to or read about says the same thing. 2 of the nicest people you'd ever want to meet. Just good, hardworking, caring people.
And it's that image, that quiet stability that makes the violence so hard to comprehend.
It's the core of the tragedy. They were also just about to have another baby.
Yeah, Elaine was 7 months pregnant.
Right. They already had their 3-year-old son, Peter.
Yeah.
And they were expecting a daughter. They'd already picked out her name.
Casey.
And because of the new baby, they were actually planning to move.
This is a huge part of the story. They weren't just moving for more space. They were trying to escape something.
Yes. They felt the area around Ina had become dangerous. They wanted to move back to Mount Carmel, get a bigger home, and just feel safe again.
And that desire to escape, it's so critical. Southern Illinois in 1987, it wasn't just quiet farm country. There was a real sense of fear in the air.
Not at all. And you're right, that context is everything. The area was experiencing an unusual spike in violence. We're talking more than 15 homicides in Jefferson County alone in the 2 years leading up to this.
For a rural area, that's a staggering number.
It created this huge amount of psychological pressure on everyone. People were on edge.
And there was one case in particular right before this that had absolutely terrified the entire community.
That's right. The thing on everyone's mind was the murder of 10-year-old Amy Schultz. She'd been raped and murdered back in May of 1987. Her body was found in July.
Just a few months before the Dardeens were killed.
Exactly, and the killer had been caught. So you have this knowledge that a predator, someone capable of that, is just out there. It created this absolute sense of dread for families.
And this fear directly affected how the Dardeens, and especially Keith, lived their lives. He was described as being extremely protective.
He was hypervigilant. And there's a really powerful story from a friend that shows just how high his guard was.
What happened?
After the Schultz murder, Keith became, really paranoid about strangers. This friend remembers being at their home late one night when a young woman's car broke down. She came to the door and asked if she could just use the phone. Simple request.
And he said no.
He refused to let her inside. He was so intensely guarded that he wouldn't even let a woman in for a moment of help.
And that detail is so chilling because it raises the biggest question of the entire case.
How did the killer get in?
Exactly. If Keith was so protective that he turned away a woman in need, how did a murderer get inside that trailer without any sign of a break-in?
It leads us right into the timeline of discovery. It started when Keith didn't show up for work.
The man who was always on time.
Always. He was due for his 7 a.m. shift on Wednesday, November 18th, 1987. He never arrived. His supervisor tried calling the house all day. No answer. This is completely out of character.
So they knew something was wrong.
Immediately. The supervisor called Keith's parents, who were divorced and lived in Mount Carmel. Neither of them had heard from him. The alarm bells were really ringing now. That evening, Keith's father, Don Dardeen, drove to Ana. He met deputies from the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office at the mobile home.
And they had a key.
They did. They used a spare key to enter the trailer. And what they found inside wasn't just a crime scene. It was a slaughterhouse.
Tell us what they saw.
They found the bodies of Elaine, little 3-year-old Peter, and the newborn baby girl. All three had been subjected to just overwhelming blunt force trauma. They were beaten to death.
Then they identified the weapon almost immediately.
Yes, it was a baseball bat. A gift that Peter had just gotten from his father for his birthday.
Using the child's own toy, a gift from his dad. That's not just opportunistic. That feels personal, like a psychological attack.
It's what investigators call a signature. It goes so far beyond just killing someone. It's about destroying the very idea of the family, of the home, using a symbol of a father's love to murder his child.
It's pure evil.
And then you have the details about Elaine and the newborn. This is one of the most horrific things you'll ever hear in any case. Elaine was bound with duct tape, her hands, her feet, and she was gagged with it. The initial beating she took was so violent, so severe, that it induced premature labor.
Oh my God.
So while she was immobilized by the tape, unable to move or scream, she delivered her daughter. The baby girl, Casey, lived for maybe 5 minutes.
And the killer was just watching.
We have to assume so. The killer watched her life begin and then chose to end it. Bludgeoned her to death, just like her mother and brother.
That act, killing a newborn, it changes everything. It speaks to a kind of depravity that is almost impossible to understand. What could profilers even make of that?
It points to a complete and total lack of empathy, a need for total annihilation. This wasn't just about killing witnesses. This was about erasing the entire Dardeen family line.
And Peter?
Peter suffered numerous injuries, abrasions, contusions, and a fractured skull. Elaine also had a massive skull fracture. The brutality was absolute.
But right after this explosion of rage, the killer did something that seems completely contradictory. The scene was staged.
It's the central paradox of the case. You have this frenzied, out-of-control violence, and then it's followed by meticulous, cold, post-mortem manipulation. The three bodies, Elaine, Peter, and the newborn Casey, were deliberately tucked into the same bed together after they were murdered.
Tucked in like they were sleeping.
Exactly. It's a twisted, bizarre ritual of domesticity, almost like the killer was trying to restore a sense of order after creating absolute chaos, or maybe projecting a false sense of peace onto the horror they'd created.
That's chilling. And you said the scene was cleaned?
Partially, yes. The killer or killers took the time to do a rudimentary cleanup, which tells you something important. It suggests they felt no urgency to leave, they felt safe, protected by the isolation of the location, maybe. It points to confidence.
And we keep coming back to the entry. No forced entry, the back door was just ajar?
It's the linchpin. It really only leaves two possibilities.
Either they knew the killer
and let them in willingly, or the killer used some kind of extreme deception to get past Keith's defenses. Given what we know about his vigilance, the deception theory is strong.
But the rage feels so personal, so intimate.
And that's the conflict that baffled investigators from day one. You have evidence pointing to a killer they knew and evidence pointing to a cunning stranger predator. Two completely different profiles.
Don't forget to subscribe to Whispers of Crime on YouTube and follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and all major podcast platforms. Like, share, and comment on this episode. Drop your review and rating. So, with Elaine and the children discovered, the immediate assumption must have been that Keith was responsible, a family annihilator who was on the run.
That was the theory. For the first roughly 24 hours, police were actively searching for him. Armed officers even went to his mother's house, thinking he might be hiding there.
But that theory completely collapsed the very next day.
It did. Late in the day on Thursday, November 19th, hunters found a body in a wheat field near Rend Lake College. It was about a mile from the mobile home.
And it was Keith.
It was Keith Dardeen.
Yeah.
And the way he was killed fundamentally changed the entire investigation.
How so? The method was different from what happened in the trailer, right?
Completely different. This is what's so critical. Keith wasn't beaten. He was killed by a firearm. He'd been shot 3 times.
So we go from blunt force trauma, which is up close, personal, frenzied, to a shooting.
Exactly. It's a shift from what profilers call affective or emotional violence to instrumental violence. Cold, calculated, and goal-oriented.
And the violence against Keith had another component, a very specific, symbolic one.
Yes. His genitals were mutilated. His penis was severed.
That's not random. That's a message.
It absolutely is. It's often an act of dehumanization or profound personal vengeance. It could be a symbolic castration, targeting his role as a father, a husband, his very masculinity. It suggests the killer had a deep personal grievance with Keith specifically.
So one type of rage for the family and a completely different targeted type of rage for Keith. But the killer wasn't done sending messages. There was the car.
That's right. Keith's car, a red 1981 Plymouth, was found. But it wasn't near the field. It was found abandoned 11 miles away, parked near the police station in Benton, Illinois.
Parked near the police station. That's unbelievably brazen.
It was a direct taunt. The interior was spattered with Keith's blood. The killer deliberately placed it where law enforcement would find it quickly. It's an act of contempt, of control, the final chilling signature.
This brings us to the timeline. Because the forensics on this are confusing and have been reported in different ways, what do we actually know about the sequence of events?
This is where it gets really complicated. The autopsies on the family in the trailer, Elaine, Peter, and the newborn, estimated they had been dead for about 12 hours when they were found on the evening of November 18th.
Okay, so that puts their time of death sometime in the early morning of the 18th or late on the 17th.
Right. But Keith's body was found late on the 19th, and the medical examiner estimated he'd been dead for 24 to 36 hours.
Wait a minute. So even though his body was found a day later, the forensics suggested he might have been killed before his family was.
Potentially, yes. It creates this huge logistical puzzle. The pathologist ultimately estimated that all 4 deaths likely occurred within an hour or so of each other, probably late on the night of November 17th.
So if that's true, it means Keith was likely the first one they targeted.
That's the leading theory, that the violence began with Keith on Tuesday night, November 17th. He was overpowered, maybe forced to let the killer in, or deceived at the door.
And then what? He was held captive while the killer attacked his family?
It's possible. Or he was removed from the scene first. He was driven to that field, executed, and mutilated. Then the killer returns to the mobile home to murder Elaine and the children.
That would explain the different methods of killing.
It would. It reinforces that dual profile. The instrumental killer takes care of Keith swiftly and symbolically in the field. Then the effective, rage-filled killer has the isolated home to unleash that intimate, brutal violence on the rest of the family.
So are we looking at one killer with a profound personality disorder, or 2 killers?
That's the question that has haunted this case for decades. A single killer who can switch between cold calculation and explosive rage, or 2 perpetrators working together, each with a different role.
And this contradiction is why the case defied profiling.
It was almost impossible to categorize. Most killers stick to a primary method, this blend of blunt force rage, execution-style shooting, and sexual mutilation. It was deeply troubling to the FBI. It's a huge part of why the case went cold so fast.
With a profile this complex, investigators must have run through all the standard motives and come up empty.
They hit a brick wall almost immediately. The usual reasons for a crime like this were just not there.
Okay, so let's walk through them. Robbery.
Ruled out. There were valuables all over the mobile home. A VCR, a camera, cash, jewelry. All left untouched, in plain sight. This was not about money.
Sexual assault.
The initial police reports and the autopsy findings from 1987 were clear. Elaine was not sexually assaulted. Now, that finding would be challenged later by Tommy Linsell's confession, but at the time, it was ruled out.
And what about, personal issues, marital problems, affairs?
They dug deep. Police did expensive background checks, interviewed everyone they knew. They found absolutely no evidence of extramarital affairs or any serious trouble in the marriage. Everyone described them as a loving, stable, religious couple.
So what about something more illicit, like drugs or gambling debts, something that could explain that level of personal vengeance against Keith?
They looked at both very closely. They did find a small amount of marijuana in the trailer,
Okay.
but it wasn't enough to suggest they were dealing or involved in anything serious. In fact, some investigators wondered if maybe the killer had left it behind by mistake.
So it was a non-factor.
Pretty much. And the autopsies confirmed there were no drugs or alcohol in any of the victims' systems. As for gambling, they did find some papers with sports scores, which raised a flag.
But that didn't fit with who Keith was.
Not at all. His mother, Joanne Dardeen, she shut that down pretty quickly. She said her son was incredibly frugal. She told this story about how he'd buy 50-cent cans of soda and then resell them at work for a small profit to put money away for Peter's college fund.
Wow. Not the behavior of a man with major gambling debts.
Exactly. So with all the standard motives ruled out, investigators and the community were left with nothing.
And that vacuum gets filled with rumors.
Instantly, rumors were flying. Because of the mutilation, there was a lot of talk about it being a ritual sacrifice by a satanic cult.
Which police looked into.
They did, and they officially ruled it out pretty quickly. There was no other evidence to support it.
So what were the actual working theories for the police?
They were forced into some less common theories.
Oh.
One was mistaken identity.
That the killer was after someone else?
Yeah, that maybe they were targeting someone who used to live in that mobile home or someone who looked like Keith. It seems unlikely given how personal the violence was, but they had to consider it.
And Keith's mother had her own theories.
She did. Joanne wondered if maybe Keith had refused to sell drugs for someone and this was payback, or that it was a rejected admirer of Elaine's who just snapped and took his rage out on the whole family. But in the end, she just said, "We just don't know."
And so, with no motive, no suspect, and a contradictory profile, the case just died.
It went completely cold. 30 detectives, over 100 interviews, and they had nothing. 2 separate FBI profilers reviewed the evidence and basically said the crime defied their standard methods. They couldn't build a consistent profile of the person who did this.
And it stayed that way for over a decade, until a voice emerged from death row.
Tommy Lynn Sells.
Let's get into his confession, because it's a huge part of the story, but it's also incredibly controversial. Who was he?
Sells was a drifter, a transient serial killer known as the Coast-to-Coast Killer. He was convicted for the 1999 murder of a 13-year-old girl named Kayleen Harris in Texas. Authorities eventually linked him to at least 22 murders all across the country. He moved around by hopping freight trains and hitchhiking.
And he had a pattern of confessing to unsolved crimes, right? This wasn't a one-time thing.
No, not at all. While he was awaiting trial in Texas, he just started confessing to everything. Investigators believed he was intentionally copying another serial killer, Henry Lee Lucas, who famously confessed to hundreds of murders, many of which he didn't commit.
Why? For the attention? To delay his execution?
Both, probably. So you have to view everything Sells said through that lens of extreme unreliability.
So how did he connect himself to the Dardeen case? What was his story?
He claimed he knew the Ionet area from his time riding the rails, and he gave a few different versions of his story over the years, which is another red flag. In his first version, he claimed he met Keith Dardeen at a truck stop or a pool hall. He said Keith was friendly and invited him home for dinner.
An invitation that we know Keith would almost certainly never extend to a stranger.
Right. And then Sells claimed that once they were at the trailer, Keith made a sexual advance toward him, maybe suggesting a threesome with Elaine, and that this enraged him and triggered the murders.
That detail, making the victim the aggressor, that was immediately rejected, wasn't it?
By everyone. Detectives knew this was a pattern for Sells. He'd often invent details to make his victims seem responsible for their own deaths, to justify his rage. And the family and friends just said it was impossible. The friend who told the story about the woman at the door said, if he wouldn't let a young girl in to use the phone, he wouldn't let a 22-year-old man in for dinner. It just didn't happen.
So Sells must have realized that story wasn't believable because he changed it.
He did. In a later version, he dropped the whole dinner invitation part. Instead, he claimed he was walking by the trailer and saw a for sale sign.
Okay, a different way to get in the door.
Exactly. He claimed he knocked, pretending to be interested in buying the trailer, and used that as a way to overpower Keith. He then claimed he forced Keith to bind and gag Elaine and Peter with duct tape.
Which puts Keith in the position of helping to restrain his own family.
Right. From there, his story follows the evidence. He said he forced Keith to drive to the field, mutilated him, shot him, then returned to the trailer. He also added a detail that he raped Elaine, which, again, contradicted the original police findings. Then he said he beat the rest of the family to death and drove the car to Benton.
On the surface, it hits all the major points. The weapon, the mutilation, the car. But investigators doubted him because he couldn't provide any information that wasn't already public, right?
Yeah, that was the biggest problem. He failed the tests on the non-public details. Most of what he said, the car's location, had been in the news for years. When they pressed him on specifics only the killer would know, he got things wrong. For instance, he was wrong about which seat in the car Keith was in when he was shot. That's a huge detail to get wrong.
It suggests he's guessing, just building a story around the facts he knows.
Exactly. And when they asked him about Elaine's body position in the bed, he gave a vague, incorrect answer at first, and then suddenly corrected himself. Investigators felt it was a lucky guess, not a memory.
So you have an unreliable narrator confessing to a crime, but you can't prove he was there. And the biggest reason he was never charged was legal and jurisdictional.
It's the most frustrating part of the whole Sells chapter. He offered to lead Illinois police to the crime scenes, to point out where things happened, which could have verified his story.
But Texas wouldn't allow it.
Texas law at the time didn't allow death row prisoners to be transported out of state, and they refused to make an exception for this case.
So Illinois prosecutors were stuck. They couldn't corroborate his confession on site.
They had nothing but the word of a known liar and serial killer who was getting key facts wrong. You can't file murder charges on that. It's just not enough.
And the result of that stalemate.
Tommy Lynn Sells was executed in Texas in 2014 for the murder of Kayleen Harris. He never faced charges for the Dardeen Family Massacre. The case remained essentially open and unsolved.
So if Sells was, at best, an unreliable suspect, did police ever look seriously at anyone else? Any other transient killers who fit the profile?
They did, briefly. They took a look at another prolific serial killer who was active in the region, a man known as the Railroad Killer.
Angel Maturino Resendiz.
That's him. And on the surface, there were some compelling overlaps.
What were they?
Well, Resendiz was also a transient killer who used the railway system to travel. And the Dardeen mobile home was located very close to the Illinois Central Railroad tracks. It was a perfect hunting ground for him.
And his method of killing was similar too, wasn't it?
In some cases, yes. His MO often included the use of blunt force trauma, which obviously aligns with what happened to Elaine, Peter, and the baby.
So you have the right location and the right weapon type. Why was he ruled out?
It was a matter of timing. While Resendiz was definitely active in southern Illinois later on, he committed a murder there in 1999, they could never definitively place him in the Iona area in November of 1987. Without a solid timeline connection, and with the investigation's focus shifting to Sells a few years later, the lead on Resendiz just kind of fizzled out.
So the case went cold again. But the fight for answers never stopped, and that's almost entirely because of one person, Keith's mother, Joanne.
Joanne Dardeen was just an incredible advocate for her family. She was relentless. For years, through the 90s and 2000s, she refused to let the case be forgotten. She would regularly call the one detective who was still assigned to the case, even after he retired, just to check in to make sure they hadn't given up.
She really tried to get national attention for the case, didn't she?
She tried so hard, she gathered 3,000 signatures on a petition to get the Oprah Winfrey Show to cover the story.
And what happened?
Oprah's producers turned it down. They felt the details of the crime, especially what happened to Elaine and the newborn, were just too brutal for their daytime audience.
Even for a show that covers tough topics, this was too much.
It was. America's Most Wanted also initially hesitated, but they eventually ran a segment in 1998, more than 10 years after the murders. But unfortunately, it didn't generate any new leads. Joanne was the one keeping the flame alive.
And her personal journey with the Tommy Lynn Sells confession is really telling. She started out believing he did it.
She did. When he first confessed, she told a reporter she was 99% sure he was the one. Like a lot of people, she wanted to believe they finally had an answer. But even then, she had doubts. She wanted to talk to him herself. She felt his story didn't fully explain the why. She even wondered if he'd had an accomplice, which might explain the two different killing styles.
But over time, as she learned more, her belief completely flipped.
It was a heartbreaking shift for her. By the time Sells was nearing his execution in 2014, Joanne had come to believe that he was not the killer. She said his claims just didn't match what she knew about her son and the evidence. She fought to keep Sells alive, not to save him, but so that investigators could prove, one way or another, if he was involved.
And her last public statement on it really sums up the whole tragedy.
She just said, "A lot of people think it's done and over with, but to me it's not."
That refusal from the victim's own mother to accept the confession, that's probably the most powerful evidence that this case is still wide open. If Sells was lying, then the real killer is still out there. So where does that leave the investigation today?
It's still an open case, but it's cold. It's managed by the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office and the Illinois State Police. And they're still haunted by that central puzzle.
The rage versus the calculation.
Exactly. The intimate, explosive violence inside the trailer versus the cold, symbolic vengeance carried out against Keith in the field.
The former prosecutor in the county, Gary Duncan, even admitted that ambiguity is what keeps the possibility of another killer alive.
He did. He said that while you can't completely discount Sells' claims, there's a fair possibility that the actual killer may still be out there. The fact that a confession from a known serial killer couldn't close this case says everything about the lack of definitive evidence from the original investigation.
And that's really the heart of it now. The investigation in 1987 was so limited by the technology of the time.
Massively limited. A crime scene with this much physical violence today would yield a treasure trove of forensic evidence. But in 1987, DNA analysis was in its infancy. It required a lot of material, and things of trace evidence were really subjective.
So the hope for solving this, after 37 years, rests entirely on re-examining the original evidence with modern science.
It's the only path forward. It all hinges on what was collected and preserved back in 1987. Modern technology can pull a DNA profile from tiny samples that would have been completely useless back then. Skin cells on a weapon, saliva on duct tape.
So what are the key pieces of evidence that could still hold the killer's DNA?
There are a few critical items. First and foremost, the baseball bat. The physical effort required for those murders means the killer was likely shedding skin cells, maybe sweating.
That seems like the most likely source.
It is. Then you have the duct tape that was used to bind Elaine. If the killer handled it, there could be touched DNA on the non-sticky side or the roll it came from. And finally, any forensic samples taken from Keith's body or from inside his blood-spattered car.
And if they can get a profile from any of that evidence, it opens up a whole new world of investigation.
It opens up the world of investigative genetic genealogy, or IgG.
This is how so many cold cases are being solved now.
Exactly. You take the unknown DNA profile from the crime scene, you upload it to a genealogy database, and you look for distant relatives of the killer who have submitted their own DNA.
And from there, you can build a family tree backwards to find your suspect?
Yes. You find a third or fourth cousin, and you can build up the family tree to identify a person who's in the right place at the right time. It's the best hope not only for finding the real killer, but for definitively proving whether Tommy Lynn Sells was lying or telling the truth.
It's a case where the horror is just so extreme, the psychology is baffling, and the only confession is from a man no one can trust. Without that forensic link, Keith, Elaine, Peter, and Casey remain 4 innocent lives lost to a ghost.
The Dardeen Family Massacre is just a hallmark of unsolved brutality. The fact that there was no robbery, no clear motive, and this bizarre staging of the bodies next to this extreme personal violence. It has hidden the killer for 37 years. We have to remember this family and hope that science can finally bring them, and Joanne, some measure of peace. If you have any information regarding the murders of the Dardeen family, please contact the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office at 618-244-8004. And don't forget to subscribe to Whispers of Crime on YouTube and follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and all major podcast platforms. Like, share, and comment. Give us your positive review and rating.
The only way to truly honor the memory of this family is through that renewed commitment to forensic science. Until that preserved evidence is tested and yields a DNA profile, the calculated terror that obliterated the Dardeens still walks free. And that chilling contradiction, the killer's ability to switch between pure rage and icy control, remains one of the most frightening truths in the history of cold cases.